welcome back to Capricorn Radio TV. This is your host James, and I'm super excited about today's guest, and we're going to get into the world of esotericism and Templars and Freemasonry, and what a guest we have for you today. Big request to have Tim Wallace Murphy on the show today, fellow Irishman I believe as well, and just spoke to Tim a minute ago. He is with us on the call. If you want to follow along with today's author, you can go to timwallace-murphy.com. You'll find out all about today's guest there. And 13 books in the making. Tim, he's been a busy boy. Just a quick bio on him. Irish-born, internationally known author and lecturer. Tim Wallace Murphy is the author of 13 published books, mostly about the history and variety of heretical forms of spirituality. He once redefined heresy as the use of God's gift of free will in matters of religion, faith, and dogma. He's appeared on 8 or 9 documentaries, and many of his interviews can be found on YouTube. Just type in Tim Wallace Murphy, you'll get a prolific archive there as well. He lectures all around the world and still does tours, I believe, in France. And without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Tim. You're very welcome to the show.
It's delightful. The first time on this show, so I'm curious to see how it'll go.
Oh, that's I'm always curious to see how a guest goes as well, Tim, especially with somebody with your background. I mean, tell us a little bit about the man first before we get into the author. You've got quite an interesting background, medical and then psychology.
Well, it's all a bit confusing. My mother was originally born in France, but spent most of her life, her early life, in Ireland. She was Jewish. My father was a young doctor who served with the Irish Free State Army during the Civil War. It was some little time before he found out which side he'd join. So it was a bit confusing all the way along. So I'm a Franco-Irish Yiddish boy who sort of survived the Catholic education.
Wow.
I studied medicine when I came out of the army. I was in UCD from 1953 to 59. Realized I'd picked the wrong profession. And at the end of it all, I announced to the waiting public, who weren't exactly waiting with bated breath, I announced that I was going to give up medicine and become a writer. And the guy next to me in the pub, McDade's in Harry Street, was Brendan Behan. And he said, Jesus, Timmy, every Irishman's got a good novel in him, and that's usually the best fucking place to keep it. I bummed around the world for about 10 years, went back to college, qualified as a psychologist, and practiced clinical psychology for nearly 30 years. And one of my clients, he got himself off the drink and the drugs. He turned into a very good friend, and we ended up writing a book together.
Wow.
He died before it was published. He had a very fast-moving cancer, a wonderful man, Trevor Ravenscroft. And I'd found what I was here for.
Wow.
It was as simple as that. That was 14 books ago.
Wow. I guess for the audience, Templars in America, this is the one that I hit at home for me. I love the material. It seems to be we were programmed with this Christopher Columbus episode, and it's like...
We've been programmed with an awful lot of shit. An awful lot of bullshit. You could surf the Atlantic on a tidal wave of it. Yeah. I've just done a rewrite of that, which will come out in a few months' time. And the working title is We Did Not Come to Conquer. And it's a list of all the people who crossed both the Atlantic and the Pacific to the Americas for trade. And that was going on literally since the end of the Ice Age. I mean, Columbus was a latecomer. And sadly, he'd triggered what became, in fact, a genocidal invasion, which had disastrous consequences for the native people of the Americas, North and South. But, that's another story.
Yeah. My good friend Scott Walter, I know he's been talking about the Templars coming a long time, but I know it's been in the record.
forgive me. Let's talk about people who write about fact, not fantasies.
Well, this is why I bring it up, because the History Channel is promoting this through media. But like we have scholars like you, Tim, that have had this in the record for a long time now, and it's kind of been popularized in the last 2 years. And you know, I get it. I understand there's a sensationalism around it.
It's not sensationalism. Most of it is fantasy.
Yeah. Wow.
His first book, The Hooked X, was about a writing aberration on a Latin 12th century document. Scott Walter can't read or write Latin. Wow. He's never held a 12th century document in his hand in his life. And it's constructed this absolutely wonderful fantasy around it, which would be great if it was published for what it is, fiction.
Wow. Why do you think then the History Channel promotes these guys?
Because they make money.
It's all money.
It's all about money. History Channel is like any other business, is in the business of satisfying its shareholders. I don't envy Scott Walter's financial success, but it makes life very, very difficult for those of us who are writing from a factual basis and trying to make that accessible to ordinary people, to have fantasists and idiots like that floating around.
Let's get into the origins of the Knights Templars then, Tim. Lay it out. Give us the snippet of the genre there. What's the original date, the inception of the Knights Templar that we have on record, and how do you see that progressing then from its very early inception?
It's very difficult to discern when the Knights Templar were actually founded. To understand amongst historians that it was 1118. Now that was certainly the time that they were granted accommodation at what we now know as the Al-Aqsa Mosque on Temple Mount by King Baldwin II. But a variety of dates and documents attesting to them exist which could put their foundation date as early as 1095, the time of the First Crusade, but most dating for the first decade of the century. There is no hard and fast date or place for their foundation. What we do know is that the original founding members were all related, that they were very close relatives, and later research has indicated that it was part of a long-held plan. Now, they were granted recognition by the Patriarch of Jerusalem in 1117, 1118, and their stated declaration was to protect the pilgrimage routes. That was their objective. And they found a rather odd way of doing it. They vanished from plain sight. And earlier, or in the latter part of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, their activities in their first 8 or 9 years were rediscovered by a certain Lieutenant Warren of the Royal Engineers, who found their excavations under Temple Mount. They had burrowed down through the solid rock and created a network of what they discovered. A lot of speculation, which ranges from the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is actually quite plausible. But whatever it was, they all came back to Europe in one hell of a hurry in 1127. And another relative, a man called Bernard de Fontaine, known to history as Bernard of Clairvaux, convened a council at Troyes and gained the order papal recognition and almost total autonomy and freedom from interference by the church or the state. They were responsible to no priest or prelate or prince, merely to the Pope through the Grand Master alone. Nobody had ever been granted that sort of freedom before. I have since discovered that the founding families who had plotted together to found the Knights Templar, all claimed descent from the priesthood, the hereditary priesthood of the High Temple of Jerusalem. There are a group of families called Rex Deus, and their shadowy influence weaves in and out of European history. They're the people who produced the artifact we now know as the Turin Shroud. The Scottish branches of that family, 300 years after the Templars were suppressed, played some mysterious role in the creation of the modern craft of Freemasonry. And that is how a lot of Templar teaching and tradition passed from Templarism into the Freemasonic order. But let's make no mistake about it, there is no direct connection. The Templars were suppressed in 1314. They were convicted of absolute under torture. The Grand Master and his second in command, Geoffrey de Charnay, contrary to public belief, were not burnt at the stake. They were cooked over a slow fire. That prolonged the agony and meant their bones could be ground up into powder and scattered into the Seine, so there would be no relics. And there is a legend, and it's nothing more than that when the French king was executed during the Revolution, a man leapt onto the scaffold, dipped his hand in the bucket of blood from the dead king, held his hand up and said, "Jacques de Molay, thou art avenged." Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's a wonderful story. But the Templars are one of the most mysterious and brilliant orders in European history. You have Templar artifacts with you.
Yes?
You use a checkbook.
Yes, the checkbook. Yes, I've heard you speak of this before. I actually have one there, yes.
Yes, that's relics of the 12th century.
Wow.
It originated in the 12th century with the Knights Templar. They ran what I jokingly call Halo Tours Incorporated, the beginning of the travel business. If you wanted to go on pilgrimage, wherever you lived, if you wanted to go to Rome or to Compostela or to Jerusalem, you saved your pennies, you went along to the nearest Templar commandery and paid over a sum of money and got a coded receipt, a chit. Every time you had to spend from that, you took it to the nearest Templar commandery who would spend, pay off. If you got home, you presented your chit and you got the bill for the balance or the refund of any monies that were still there in your credit. It was the medieval credit card.
Wow. How fascinating, Tim. Tim, you mentioned Freemasonry there and the kind of the difference between. There's a difference, but there's a connection. Lay out the Freemasonry. I know Freemasonry, there's pockets of it, and they all kind of recognize each other, and there's a camaraderie there, but they're kind of distinctive in their own. So we have branches of Rosicrucianism, and the Knights Templar may have been a primary model. So maybe just lay out the difference between, or the connections between Freemasonry and the Rosicrucianism and the original Templars then.
The Templars were accused of heresy. And undoubtedly heretics they were by the standards of the time. Mm-hmm. They didn't believe that Jesus came to redeem us from sin. They believed he came to reveal a pathway of spirituality. And after the Reformation, with the breakdown of the monopoly of the Catholic Church in Europe, the founding families who'd founded the Knights Templar got involved with the craft masons and used that organization as a vehicle to promote spirituality and unity between the major faiths. To become a mason, all you need to do is to believe in a creator and be a person of good standing. And they claim, very simply and rightly, to help make good men better. They simple and very, very transformative and powerful. And they encourage their members to explore other branches of spirituality, such as Rosicrucianism. It's all about making the world a better place, making the world a place fit for living in, encouraging universal brotherhood, irrespective of race, colour or creed. Brotherhood based on the foundations of truth and justice. Now take a look around the world and tell me we don't need that.
If there was ever a time, Tim, it's now. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know you have a book on the Palestine people. I want you to give that little mention, give us the title of that book. And I just think I'm going to get the copy of that, Tim. I haven't read it, but I've come across it in preparation for the show, and I think it's a fascinating read. And I think you've done a service to the Palestine people. To show the truth.
I'm on my own spiritual pathway. I'm searching for truth and justice. And the name of the game is to always diffuse prejudice, be it racial or religious or sexual or whatever. As I mentioned earlier, my mother was Jewish. And as a young man, when the State of Israel was founded, I was overjoyed, and I was totally taken in by their propaganda about this noble little state that was assailed by several Arab countries and who had to fight so valiantly to establish itself. And I didn't start to see the truth until the 1980s, to the massacres at Sabra and Shatia. Ended a dinner in London after the first war against Gaza, and the object of the dinner was to raise funds for medical aid for Palestine. And at that dinner I said to somebody, many people have written about different aspects of the Palestinian-Israeli problem. Nobody has ever written a history of the Palestinian people. And the gentleman looked at me and said, I know just the man who should do that. So I came to write the book. Now, up to now, it's only been available as a Kindle book. It's coming out as a paperback in about 6 or 8 weeks' time. And the book is titled The Genesis of a Tragedy, A Brief History of the Palestinian People.
Do you feel duped then? I mean, you really feel duped having bought into that, because this is before my time. I'm born in the 70s. I'm a 70s guy, but you know, and to us, we've only kind of lived in the aftermath of that, Tim. But you've watched this evolve, so you've seen the precursor to all this.
Well, it's not just the precursor; it's the obscenity of the twisted lies and propaganda. Just think about it.
There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descended of a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked to these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. The megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. The Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Grillen of Aoch Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day Special here, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltingy Stone Circle, Kilcooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox Event Alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noth and Doth, Also, Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex. And we're going to finish at the Tua de Danan's origins in the northwest of Ireland, the Carroll Keel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carroll Moor 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the tours events page for more details at swagger.com.
Rooms within rooms, right? And then you got the inner sanctum.
You can see where this was probably covered over. This is open up here. It's got a portal open
Yeah.
chamber here. So this would have had a covering, this would have had a covering, and this is all just backfilled to make the mountain. It's been reduced down to nearly ground level.
The Jews who are the Zionists in Palestine are nearly all Ashkenazis. They're descendants of people who converted to Judaism in Europe in the 3rd century of the Christian era. They have no legal, moral, or historical right to the Holy Land whatsoever. They claim a right, and they use as justification their persecution of the Palestinian people. They use the Holocaust. Now, I can think of no more obscene memorial to the millions of people who were slaughtered so brutally during the war than to use their death and their suffering as an excuse to inflict the same sort of treatment on somebody else.
And it's exactly what it is, Tom. It's an infliction of a protocol or a mandate on people. I mean, let's go into the politics. I mean, Britain and America is heavily involved in Israel. Do you think it's their tool or their operation in the Middle East? It's their operational zone? It's their foot in the door?
America is the one who's footing the Israeli bill. And again, I point out in the book, and I cite the research for it, and it's verifiable, the most powerful political lobby in the world is AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. They fund candidates on both sides of every election in
and I'm glad that I travelled, Tim, because in travelling, I worked as an engineer, and I got to see the Outer Hebrides down to Cornwall, Devon. I lived in Plymouth for a while. I used that as a base to do the Southwest, and I was met with racism, and I was also met with beautiful people, and I think everybody is my brother and sister on this planet, and I know that you think the same about this, because we are all brothers and sisters. We're all children of the earth, and it's only when you travel and you go outside your own border do you see that,
Yes.
and I feel privileged to have done that.
Well, you mentioned Plymouth. I used to live about 20 miles away in a lovely little town called Totnes. I lived
Totnes,
there.
I know Totnes well, yes.
A glorious place to be.
Yeah.
But I'm now in the southwest of France, which is even more delightful. But again, the thing that makes it here is not so much the scenery, which is stunning. It's the people.
The people,
The kindness and the goodness of the people. And wherever you go, if you treat people with a smile and with courtesy, it will be reflected back. We're all the same. We're all children of God. And the thing that gets me angry is when somebody claims to be, shall we say, Christian, and he starts preaching hatred of gay people, for example, or Jews, or of Muslims, or somebody else starts preaching anti-Christian rhetoric. That's the time I get off my butt and I start to intervene and put an alternative point of view. We're all children of the same God. We're all equal. And we all need the same things, basically. Yeah. What do we want? We want food on the table, a roof over our head.
I know you've probably done more books than most.
If anything, it is an understatement. Two major contributions helped shape the European culture, and neither of which have been properly recognized. On the commercial side, the Knights Templar are the key. They created the foundations of both capitalism and of democracy. Prior to the Templars, Europe was very much a feudal system, and power remained in the hands of the local gentry. With the rise of the Templars and the rise of Templar banking and trade, the standard of living started to rise, and a new class of people emerged called the bourgeoisie, the trading classes. And power started to shift. And with the power came the beginnings of democracy. The Templars laid the foundations which enabled people to accumulate capital. It laid the foundations for present-day capitalist Europe. They were like a multinational conglomerate. The other contributory factor, which was even more important, was the wonderful beacon of light that existed in Moorish Spain. At a time when Charlemagne couldn't write his name, there was a university in Cordoba which drew its intake from schools which featured Catholics, Jews, and Muslims. They published 20,000 books a year. They had the second biggest library in the world.
Wow.
They gave us the study and the scholarship that brought back Greek classics into Christian thinking. We talk about the schoolmen of the Middle Ages, people like Thomas Aquinas. Averroes, born in Cordoba, and the great Jewish thinker Moses Maimonides was also born in Cordoba at the same period. So there are two aspects of influence which began to merge and meld and transform European society. Muslim scholarship gave us the foundation of astronomy, gave us the foundations of medicine, gave us the foundations of science, gave us the foundations of philosophy. We had nothing before that. Absolutely nothing. It had gone.
Sure.
Because the remnants of Greek and Roman thinking had been suppressed by the church as pagan. And it started to creep in through the back door in the 10th and 11th centuries. Europe's first medical school was founded not far from where I am now, a place called Montpellier, back in the 1300s by Jewish doctors who'd done their training in North Africa and Moorish Spain. And it's still a centre of excellence to this day.
Where does the Cistercian monks fit into the Templars? Because these guys were floating around at the same time.
They were more than floating around. Cistercian monks were an offshoot of the Benedictines, founded by a man called Stephen Harding, an Englishman, who was appalled that the Benedictines had degenerated into a luxurious, self-seeking crowd. And he wanted to go back to the original, primitive, very simple ideas. And then, shortly after he founded the order, it was struggling called Clairvaux, and Hugh of Champagne later became a Knights Templar, and he was the liege lord of all the founding members of the Knights Templar, the family connection again. And one of his minor nobles, and again a distant relative, Bernard of Fontaine, another member of this Rex Deus family group, said he was going to join the order. His family were horrified. He was very persuasive because when he eventually joined some 2 years later, 33 of his cousins came with him. And Bernard of Clairvaux became the advisor and teacher of popes. He was the one who arranged the official recognition of the Knights Templar, and until Bernard's death, the Knights Templar and the Cistercians were like two arms of the same order. They began to separate more distinctly after that. But in the beginning, if you read something applied to the Cistercians, it almost inevitably would apply to the Templars as well, or vice versa.
Wow.
And there's an odd one for the conspiracy theorists amongst you. Bernard of Clairvaux, in his book In Praise of the New Knighthood, instructed the new warrior knights of the Temple to pay homage to the house of Bethany, the descendants of Mary Magdalene. And you go figure that one out.
Wow. Wow. What is it about Templar history that's so exciting? I mean, it covers everything. It's got the Crusades in there. It's got the Inquisition. It's got European history from all the different doctrines. I mean,
it's incredible bravery. Bloody lot, apart from the kitchen sink. And the mystery is very simple. Here's an order of warrior monks, which was a new idea at the time. They only lasted a little over just about 200 years. And yet their transformative effect right across Europe was so stupendous that nobody dared ask the question, why did they become so influential when so many other orders, which were better equipped in the beginning or more well-financed, didn't? And the answer is very simple. They had a different belief system. They were not Christians in the sense that the church at that time would have welcomed or recognized.
It wasn't money or property. It wasn't just that.
No, it was different. They followed a spiritual pathway, and again, it's all down to service. Everywhere the Templars had property, the economy rose. They brought the local community with them. They spread the benefits of what they were doing amongst the people with whom they mixed. So everything got better.
Sustainability.
Yeah.
Wow.
Also brotherhood.
Brotherhood and sustainability. I mean, we don't have that today. Well, we have it today, but it's not, I mean, in terms of the whole community.
Yeah.
You know, sustainability is something, you just can't teach it to people today. Either, you know, you can try and you can philosophize as much as you want, but it's, you know,
Bottom line is, it doesn't matter about philosophy or religious belief. It's what do you do? It's the actions that make the difference. Yeah. Don't tell me, show me, is the catch cry.
Let's bring the Templars back to America again.
On that book, I fought cat and dog to stop it. If you read that book, you'll find that there is no credibility that they ever got there. I think they probably did, but that's a matter of belief, not a matter of fact.
That's the belief in the fact system, yeah. Wow. I mean, we can safely say that Columbus wasn't the only guy anyway.
Oh, no.
We definitely can say that.
There was a Scots and a couple of Venetians got across 100 years before Columbus. Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, and Niccolo Zeno. The Vikings were there. The Romans were there. There are Roman shipwrecks off Massachusetts, Nicaragua, and Brazil. The Phoenicians were there. The Minoans were there. The Chinese were there. The Japanese were there.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And they all kept quiet about it because they all had the same reason.
And that's the big question, because it was like a lucrative fishing ground, mining ground.
Yes, that's right. You kept quiet. You wanted sole access.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to say, hey, I've got a nice, rich fishing ground, I've got a rich mining territory. It's like...
For example, the Newfoundland banks as fishing grounds were used for 3 or 4 centuries by fishermen from Brittany and northern Spain and from Bristol, long before Columbus.
Wow. In my part of the world, I wasn't aware of this. The Spanish Armada went down across the top of Ireland. And
that's right.
In the Belfast Museum where I live, but it's the Spanish Armada, when they retrieved some of the wreckage, I was like, why is there a Templar's cross in a Spanish ship?
The Templar cross survived the order by a very considerable period. The order was abolished in 1314 by the Pope on the grounds not that it had committed any criminal or canonical offence, but it had fallen into disrepute. Okay. Right? That's the official reason for the suppression of the order. It carried on in Portugal under a different name and under different rules, and it was known as the Knights of Christ. They popularized in the Iberian Peninsula the idea of putting the Templar cross on sails. And it's just a spin-off from that.
So it's kind of like an evolution of the concept, and either migrating this way or that way, but it's kind of, which most people just think it's one order that survived all the way, like a linear. It's not linear.
It isn't. And anybody who tells you that it is, and some modern recreations of the order make spurious claims for continuity, usually citing a document called the Charter of L'armenius, which no respectable historian will give a second glance at as a blatant piece of forgery. The Templars were suppressed in 1314. We know what happened to them. Most of them were pensioned off or joined other orders, and their names are listed. We know what happened in Portugal and how the order changed and evolved and kept going for another couple of centuries. But it was no longer the Templar order.
Mm.
It was no longer born in Portugal.
No.
So the whole system had changed. As an order, the Templars died the death in 1314. Their philosophy continued, their teachings continued in secret, but not the order.
Look what happens in a language today. English, for example, is a great example. English from the 17th century is different to English today. It changes, it's fluid, it twists and it turns, and it modernizes itself.
Yeah.
It's like everything. It evolves in its own way.
If you want to hear traces of 17th century English, go to the States. If you want to hear 17th century French, listen to somebody who's speaking Quebecois.
Yeah.
You want to hear 17th century German, go to one of the colonies.
Mm.
This is how it works.
Yeah.
The mainstream of the language is in a state of constant change and evolution. They're living things, they're living entities. Thank God.
Wow. You mentioned Rex Deuce and the families. Was it Gnosticism you were talking about? Is that right?
Yeah, they were Gnostics.
Tell us about Gnosticism as a subject, which is the core of Freemasonry, I believe.
It's the core of any form of spirituality. Gnosticism derives from the transformative effects of following a spiritual path. See, if I say I'm a Catholic, or a Protestant, or a Jew, or a Hindu,
Mm-hmm.
I'm immediately separating myself off from the vast majority of the world, for starting. I'm saying I'm special and different. I'm also saying I subscribe to a body of belief that somebody else is. I don't have to subscribe to any body of belief. I learn from my own experience. It's an experiential process. If I'm following a valid spiritual path, that experiential process is going to transform my life and my values in a fairly predictable way.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately they're all tapping into the same source. And gnosis is the insight and understanding that comes, sacred knowledge they call it, comes from following a spiritual path. It's a personal thing. It's not somebody's handed down and written in a book. You're not taught it because you've got to a certain degree. You're given the degree because you've achieved the insight through your own resources.
Wow.
It's an internal spiritual matter. And ultimately, it was the basis of what later became religion. Our earliest archaeological artifacts are the cave paintings and the little figurines that were found by them. And there's a cave painting near here in a cave called Les Trois Frères in the Ariège, which gives the game away what it's all about. It's a man dressed in shamanistic costume. In other words, a member of the hunter-gatherer tribes who was seeking divine assistance on how his tribe could survive in a hostile world. This was the beginning of it all. And this ultimately is the whole point of spirituality. And spirituality, rather than religion, sustained an empire in Egypt for 3,000 or 4,000 years. And again, it was based on the principle of service. Only of prestige. But the knowledge they got, the sacred knowledge, was for the benefit of the entire community. And for example, they attained levels of brain surgery that we are struggling to replicate at the moment. They were well ahead of their time.
Yeah.
The ancient Celts doing brain surgery. There's an artifact called the Orvington skull, which was trawled up off the southern coast of England in the 1920s.
Wow.
It's of a man who was about 50 years of age who has survived quite severe brain surgery. There was a defined hole in his skull which had healed. Our ancestors knew a lot more than we give them credit for.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually had done a show on some tree panning. There was tree panning going on, and there's many examples of this, Tim.
Yes.
Many.
In different cultures.
Where they were probably using obsidian blades, very sharp, which they use in I believe, in the medical profession today, because it's really sharp.
Yeah.
That's an incredible advancement.
Yes. And we look back and we call these people primitive. Yeah. We know nothing about them.
Yeah. I know my own research into ancient astronomy. It's led me into other areas like this, because I look at all history now as different. Because if they had a high advancement in astronomy, something like 90% of the monuments before 1500 BC have alignments to them. Newgrange, for example, in Ireland, Stonehenge.
I would put it nearer 98%.
Yeah, and that's an incredible achievement. It shows you. These guys were anatomically no different to us. I mean, they did it against the odds, if you ask me.
When I was a student, I was a member of the UCD Archaeological Society.
You probably knew Michael G. O'Kelly.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was a strange place. But all of these places are weird. And it's not just the alignments. For example, Silbury Hill in England, near Avon, that was excavated by the University of South Wales back in the 70s. And they reckon that the 7-stepped limestone structure, man-made 7-step limestone structure, which is perfectly aligned, which is inside it, took 7 million man-hours to build.
Whoa.
Now, we are talking here about a subsistence farming society.
Incredible.
In heaven's name, impelled them to spend that amount of time. It was important to them. And we haven't got the faintest idea.
Yeah. It's like we have to look back through a very narrow lens, and we have to try, as well as that, we have to get rid of our own cultural aspects, because it's a very narrow window. We're only looking at fragments that are left.
If you, for example, you mentioned earlier on the Inquisition, if you want to understand how the Inquisition operated and how they were able to manipulate people, you've got to try and go back and understand what the ordinary guy in the street felt, feared, loved, worshipped, or hated 800 years ago, 900 years ago. Now, with the best will in the world, we can't do that. We can try, but unless you can really...
You know, there's another place in Scotland, I can never remember which one it is. It's on the Orkneys. There's a rock-cut ditch beside the stone circle. And the same thing, that there's so many man-hours to cut this ditch. And here's the thing, they could have moved this circle this way or that way, but they said, no, we want it here for some astronomical reason. And they cut rock to make a ditch, a moat around it. You know?
We're only guessing.
There's guesswork going on, yeah. I mean, you can only guess, but you can say, like, you know, you can always marvel at them. I always marvel at the mindset of these people. It's like, because they had something driving them. They had something.
Some belief system was driving them, which made what they were doing of vital importance. We will never really get to grips with it until we can stumble on what was there. You see, it's exactly the same when you're looking at the Knights Templar. You've got to understand the social, political, religious atmosphere.
The whole background.
The whole background. When you're looking at the wonderful academic explosion that was going on in Cordoba between the time of the Moorish invasion and the 1400s, you've got to again look at the background in which it's occurring. And then you start to give thanks for the men of insight. People like the Medici, who, when the last Moors and Jews were being expelled from Spain, spent a fortune sending couriers to search the libraries of monasteries, of religious houses, of ex-university buildings, looking for original Greek Europe, at San Marco in Florence. I wonder, I'm in awe of some people, and I'm horrified by the others. That was the makeup of society at the time. And when I look about, how different is it today?
Yeah. I want to talk about the Nag Hammadi, and I know you're versed in this. You definitely are. I've only touched on this recently. I wasn't aware of it, but I was aware of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think the Dead Sea Scrolls are such a fascinating find. I really do. I think since the 40s, since the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Let's use the two of them.
Two of them together. Yeah. I mean, without the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi, I mean,
the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered first. And they fell into the hands of the church, who sat on them and tried to restrict access to them and wouldn't let people study them until their version was out, which totally distorted the whole thing. The Dead Sea Scrolls were the earliest discovered, and the monopoly on those wasn't broken until about 10, 12 years ago. 15 years ago.
They've had 50 years.
The Nag Hammadi scrolls were discovered a couple of years later, and I've had an English translation of the entire bloody lot on my shelves for 20-odd years.